Welcome, everybody, back to our insurance series. I'm here with Ryan. We are going to give some parents some peace of mind today about surviving new drivers and insurance, and just giving some tips and tricks and some value to those who might be in this position in the coming future. Like myself, I almost have a 13-year-old. It's crazy to think, but and I think, are your kids drivers yet, Ryan?
Not yet. I'm on the cusp, just like yours. So
Okay.
11 and 14, and
Oh, yes.
they want the car now. So
Yeah,
we'll
right.
find out.
So, do you want me to shoot some questions off to you, or do you want to kind of just give me a roundabout?
I'll give you kind of the top points, and then go Q&A from there.
Sure.
So the important thing for me, when you have a young driver, when you have a new driver coming on, the most important thing you can do is involve them in the process. Don't just simply sign them on and go ahead. I think having them be an integral part of the entire process, so they get an understanding of how to go about the process as well, and what steps they need to know, and know their coverage. It's a good learning opportunity for them, just like they're learning to drive. There's definitely going to be learning involved in insurance, and learning about how they can do it to the best of their ability as well. A couple of things to think about are always involve them with, like, the shopping around. And if you have a young driver, make sure that you're shopping around various different places. Each insurance company will have their own risk threshold, their own um, pricing that they've worked in. Some places are more preferential to new drivers, to younger drivers. And if you have your insurance somewhere else, always make sure that you inquire about a family plan discount or a multiple vehicle discount. There's also specific young driver discounts as well, like good student discounts, or like student discounts, depending. Make sure that you inquire and have them look into it. Usually they're really easy to find,
Okay.
and most insurers do have them.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions is, are any discounts available for good grades, driver education courses? Because I know when I was doing how you can't have your full license fast enough, and then it's expedited when you took the driver's course, right?
Yes, most insurance. So some of the discounts that they'd have is some of them are grade dependent. So if you're a good student, if you're getting A's or B's, then there will be a discount for that. If you've taken driver training,
Right.
most companies will also have a discount for that. And then some of them will even have an occasional driver discount. So if they're not the primary driver on any of the vehicles, then there may be a discount there as well.
Okay. And then what about being accident free for a certain period of time? Are there some?
Yes, when you're talking young students, when you're talking like new drivers,
Yep.
usually not as relevant for them as it would be for, like, the older drivers.
Right.
But the longer their history will continue, and there's discounts to be had there. But for them, they'll be coming in kind of at the base level, where they probably have very limited experience, very limited history in which to base it off of. So
Right. So I know that we talked on a previous episode about you can get coverage that will kind of safeguard you from anything like a ticket or something that happens. Tell us a little bit about that.
So there are certain discounts. Some of them are, like you said, the ticket discount or ad claims for your accident forgiveness. In a lot of cases for younger drivers, and the companies that have those types of discounts will have a criteria for the number of years driving. So they may or may not qualify for the coverage. They will in a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, but right off the bat, usually not. The other thing to pay
Right.
attention to, if you have a young driver, is the number of vehicles in your household. So under the law, if you have 3 or 4 vehicles and there's only you and your spouse, young driver comes on board, they would then have to be rated as a primary driver of usually the highest rated vehicle. So
Okay.
it would come on, and that's where, with young drivers, in a lot of cases, the prices for your policy will spike. And it's not a good thing, but that's when you start looking at things that you can do to kind of mitigate, or kind of lower, or make it easier for them to access into it.
Right.
Usually what I'll recommend is keep the number of cars to below the student, or below the young driver. That way you're avoiding being overly punished for a situation like that, where you have too many vehicles to the household, where
Mm-hmm.
they would then have to be listed as a primary driver.
Right.
So if there's you, your spouse, and two kids, keep two cars. If one of them's older, maybe three would be kind of the ideal zone to be in for vehicles to household.
Right. Now, can a student go out on their own and get insurance?
If so, it comes down to a concept called insurable interests. So if the parent owns the vehicle, it would be insured under their policy. If it's a young driver, and I have this situation a lot, they go out and they buy their own vehicle and it's in their name,
Mm-hmm.
then they would have their own policy.
Right.
They would have to go out and get their own insurance. In most cases, what you would look to do is have it somehow tied to the parent's policy, so that they're getting that discount
Okay.
while still having their own separated policy.
Okay. So I guess it just depends on the situation, but sometimes they can go out on their own when owning their own vehicle and their own policy, as opposed to being part of a family policy.
Exactly. It just has to do with who owns what. It boils down to whose name is on the ownership documentation. So if the actual ownership is in co-named, so if it's the mom co-signs for the loan for the vehicle, or a situation like that, it can be included on either way. It would be cheaper to include it with the mother's history and driving background,
Okay.
rather than with the young driver. So that's why I would push for it the other way. The other thing to know about is, with younger drivers, in a lot of the situations, they're going to be buying an older vehicle, or a vehicle that's within their price range. Then it would come to either a decision of increasing the deductible, and knowing that by increasing the deductible, it can actually really significantly lower the overall premium cost. And then the other one would be, if it was, and they are a safe driver, looking at even taking the collision off if the vehicle is a low enough value that it could easily be written off and not be like financially damaging to them. Running it with only a liability policy, so that theft or fire, or collision would not be included on it. In a lot of situations, that would make it highly affordable. And we see it a lot with young drivers who are buying their first car, and it's a 2007 or a 2010 Ford Focus, or whatever else, where the collision cost could be for the young driver in like $1,000 a year, whereas the vehicle itself is not even significantly worth that value.
Right, right. Um, Now, what about, so what if you are in a situation where the family has four vehicles, and it's going to be quite pricey to add the child on as a primary driver? Could the parent sell the car to the kid and put it in their name? Sometimes would that be beneficial or no?
If there were too many vehicles on the policy, there's really not much you can particularly do, because it goes to who has the ownership. So if you're looking to avoid them being put on the highest risk or the highest rated vehicle, what you would do is insure them, and have their name put on the lowest, and then having them rated as the primary driver on that. So if you have a 2024 Ford Bronco, a 2024 Silverado, and like a 2002 Malibu that you've had for years, you can transfer over the ownership to the teen on the Malibu, gift them the car, and then put them as the primary on that car, either on its own policy or on yours. And that's how you would look to do that.
Okay. Yeah, what I was saying was if you took one of the vehicles and essentially put it into their name
Yeah,
and they own
that is a way that you can do it. It's just still, if they're on the policy, you'd have to put them on the highest risk vehicle. So
right. Right.
if you transfer it entirely into their name, right, their own policy, then yeah, you can do it that way.
Okay. Okay. And then what about the licensing system? How does that affect insurance rates like G1, G2, those kinds of
So
things?
with G1, most of the time, I wouldn't even insure the young driver. They have to be with someone in the vehicle, and it has to be someone who is licensed, it in most cases will be the parent, who will have their own insurance. So it's not mandatory. It's not super necessary. Once they hit that G2 threshold, then that is the highest that they will pay, and
Right.
it can be very punishment. It's based on how many years they've had their license, how many years they've been insured. Once they get their G, there is a drop. It's not as significant as most people would think, but there is definitely a differential between the two, and so it gives them more freedom to be out and about as well, under the different licensing system. But they're still deemed a high risk driver because they do not have that experience. They're usually not like the. I don't want to say that they're not safe because that's not fair. But as far as the insurance industry in general looks at them, they say, well, we don't know enough about them. They're young drivers, male,
Yeah.
female, doesn't matter. But they're young drivers. They're driving a vehicle for the first time. We don't really know what to expect from them.
Right.
So
They need some kind of a track record to go off of.
yeah, and so they're saying we don't know. They could be a maniac. They could be whoever. They could be the safest driver in the world. Once we have the track record, then we'll look at it. But it's G2 to G in terms of licensing. There is like a bump because it's a more experienced driver as well. But
Right.
in terms of like their insurance history and everything else, it's definitely not as significant as some people would think it would be.
Right. But encouraging them to get their G is highly recommended, right? Like
Absolutely. And
as
and
soon as
it
possible.
has to do with it doesn't expire. There's a ton of positives to having the G versus the G2. It doesn't expire. The teen has more freedom. There is just more option for them, and the insurance industry itself, and just their friends as well would definitely deem it as important, I'm sure. And it's a situation where it shows a better track record. It shows that you're putting the time in to learn, to do the test, to do everything.
Right.
And the other thing that I always say that insurance looks very highly on is student driving, or driving lessons wherever you're taking them, as long as it's like an accredited
Driving
institution.
school.
Yeah, then that is usually very significant in terms of price reductions and stuff. It's usually around 12 to like 20%, somewhere around there for the year.
Which is pretty significant. That can be.
It is.
What?
When you're talking large capital numbers like $2,000, $3,000, yeah, it's a significant
Yeah.
amount of money.
It's a couple tanks of gas. I just noticed the gas price today and I was like, what is going on? Like, I don't listen to the news or anything. So I'm like, I've obviously missed something that's going on.
Well, I heard on the radio, I was driving home yesterday, and they said on the reserve, like in Shannonville, it was lined up from the highway all the way down to the gas stations. So I knew
Well,
something was happening.
yeah. Well, I usually go to Alderville to get my gas and I usually go on Wednesday mornings, but I had a bunch of appointments today. So I didn't go. But then I realized I was like, holy cow, I best get over there because I'm not paying $1.80 for gas. Like that's crazy. That's what it was here this morning. Boggles my mind. So if the young driver has a G license, but is not insured on a family policy or doesn't have their own vehicle, how does that work?
That's always a challenge. Usually my recommendation is even when your child gets their G2,
Hmm.
that first step, make sure that you put them on your insurance because
Okay.
they're only going to be punished otherwise. So
Okay.
your insurance history, even if your child has their G2 for 3-4 years, that's 3 or 4 years that they could have been getting that insurance history.
Right.
And
Right.
once you hit about 8 to 10 years, that insurance history will pay huge dividends for you.
Yeah.
Even around 5 years is another threshold. So if they're missing out on that first 3, 4, 5 years,
That could
then
be huge. Yeah.
it can make a huge difference. So my number one recommendation is even if the cost is high, I'm sure that your child will really love you more, I suppose, if you're giving them that experience. Even if they're not driving, if they just have their G2 license and they have no interest in driving,
Hmm.
put them as an occasional driver on your policy because it's the same thing as a credit history or anything else. The longer the time goes on, the better it reflects on them. And
Right.
when they're in their 20s, when they're in their 30s, then it will really impact them as well.
For
So
sure.
that's the first part of that one. And then
So
the
as
other one
soon
is
as they
if
hit their G2, they get on a policy. It doesn't matter about G1, but G2.
G2, absolutely. Put them
Okay.
on as quickly as you can. It will give them more experience. If the parents don't and then the child comes up and they have their G license and they're 17, 18, then they're starting off from scratch. So they're coming on into a policy where they have no insurance history, which would be the highest rate that you could essentially pay. They'd have the extra year of license history, but no insurance history. So it's in an ideal world, and no world is ideal, but in an ideal world, you want to
Hmm.
have your license history as close to your insurance history as possible. So that
Okay.
way each one will incrementally get higher and each one
Right.
will drop year over year. And that's why that's my recommendation to do it
Right.
that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had no idea about this. So this is all very good information for me for Jaden, getting Jaden ready
See?
to get
When
his license.
when he gets his license, now you'll have a whole guide.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I'll just have to rewatch this. And you were going to say one other thing and I cut you off.
Oh
Sorry.
no, that's okay. I finished from that one.
Okay, perfect. So I guess when you go to get insurance, I guess you just have to provide the G1, G2 permit, whatever, like their driver's license. That's
Yeah.
all that they would need to show you.
When you're setting up a new policy, essentially the VIN number for the vehicle they're going to be using, if it's especially if it's a teen with their own first car, the VIN number, the make and the model of the car, their driver's license. Um, Sit down with an agent, whether it's over the phone, whether it's in person,
Hmm.
and also judge the agent by what they're telling you, what they're if they are able to hold your hand, if they are able to teach you. That is a huge part in our industry, and there's a lot of agents that kind of struggle there. And it's making sure that you are comfortable with what you buy. If you go to a shoe store and the person just sells you a pair of shoes, they don't measure your feet, they don't learn what you're using the shoes for.
Yeah,
It's
they can't
not a
say
very
what
useful.
it
It's not a very useful pair of shoes because
is.
you don't know what you have. It's the same thing with it with insurance. If you sit down and you're talking to the agent and they're able to explain what
Hmm.
you have, why you need specific things, have an in-depth conversation with you and get to know exactly what you need and what
Exactly.
you want, then go from there and say, okay, this is specifically what we need.
Right.
And have them explain things to you, just like when you're going into a doctor. If they give you a diagnosis, it can mean nothing to you. And there's a lot of terms in insurance, I'll tell you. People will see them and they say, I don't even know, that's not English. And a lot of it comes out of legal concepts, legal terms have them explain it. Don't feel shy. Don't feel ashamed. Sit down. If you're the teen, if you're the parent, even don't be ashamed. Like,
Right.
have them explain it. Have them break it down, because it's important for me,
Hmm.
because it's important to you, that you understand everything perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any restrictions on what a new driver can drive? I mean, I don't think that there is, but maybe there is. I don't know.
Well, not particularly if we're talking passenger size. Absolutely not. You can be driving a brand new Tesla. You can be driving a huge camper van. Like, it won't make a huge difference.
Right.
The only difference it will make is the cost that you're going to be paying. And investigate, and that's why I said shop around.
Hmm.
Investigate what the different options are. Investigate the different insurance in companies in your area,
Yeah.
because each one's going to have a different rate for a different vehicle. So
Right.
usually what I tell people to do is write down 4 or 5 vehicles, get 4 or 5 different VIN numbers from different dealers,
Hmm.
bring them in. We can give you a quote on each of those vehicles, and then you can see what the cost of insuring it is,
Right.
instead of getting to the end, buying the car that you love, and finding out that you absolutely cannot afford to insure the vehicle.
Right. Now, is there a general rule where it's the newer the vehicle, the cheaper the insurance, the older the vehicle, the cheaper insurance? Like, is there a general rule to that?
Older the vehicle, and the more common, or the more easily replaceable the vehicle is, lower insurance. So if it's that's why I'll say, like, a Toyota Corolla, definitely easier and cheaper to insure, even if they're the same year, than an electric vehicle. Say it's a lot cheaper than if it's an imported vehicle, a Jaguar or a BMW, than it would be if it's either domestically made or made in huge numbers,
Hmm.
because the replacement parts will be cheaper, the insurance will then be cheaper.
Hmm. Interesting. I'm
So
learning so much.
same thing with the age of the vehicle. As it gets older, it's worth less. So that's the easy determination
Right.
factor. It's cheaper for you to find a 2007 Toyota Tercel than a 2024.
Right. That makes sense. Um, few other questions, but not very many left. What happens to my insurance rates if my teen gets into an accident and while they're named the driver?
Your your insurance rate will go up, is the short
Right.
answer.
Okay.
Um, it will carry through with the teen if they have. You were talking about if there's ramifications, or if there's actually determining factors. Each insurance company will have their own threshold. So it doesn't matter if it's a teen or if it's a 30 or a 50-year-old person, they will have a threshold in which they will say, we will not insure this anymore. Now, in Ontario, interestingly enough, actually in all of the provinces, we have something called a faculty. So if you have such a bad driving record that you cannot get insured at any one insurance company, there's you will have to go to what we would call the faculty, which is essentially a group of all the insurance companies put a pool of money together, in which we will only risk a certain portion, but we all will insure the highest risk drivers.
Okay.
So
I think we've talked about that briefly in another
yeah,
episode. That was interesting, I found.
and so that's how that would handle. Now, with a single accident, yours will go up. There'll be in a, like a charge onto it, unless you have on the main policy the accident forgiveness, in which that would still be classed under them,
Okay.
and so it would be protected.
Okay.
That would be the other side of that. Would be
Hmm.
it would then not have such dire ramifications.
Yeah.
The accident will follow the teen,
Right.
so it's
So
definitely,
it's not gonna ding me specifically. It's gonna ding my insurance cover
it dings the
policy.
policy,
Right.
but it will follow the teen.
Okay.
Which, so if they ever try to get their own within the first 5 6 years, it will follow them. So
So how long does something follow somebody?
Each insurance company has a different amount. Industry standard usually 5, 6 years is usually a good guideline for an accident that's at fault. If it's a not
Okay.
a fault accident, say for example the other person's at fault 100%, it'll be deemed a not at fault. It still follows them, but there's no ramification to the teen or to your policy.
Okay. Okay. So my policy is not going to go up if my kid gets hit in my car.
Yeah, if they're T-boned or
And
if
then we're
there's
not.
an incident that they are not at fault at all, if they're rear-ended, um, it won't punish you because you're not the person who was at fault in that situation.
Right. Now, when it comes time for when is a good time for my maybe now 19, 20-year-old to go on and into their own policy? What does that look like?
So that would it all comes down to when they have the ownership of a vehicle.
Okay.
So it has to do with if they have their money, just like with a house, you have to have equity in the thing in order to have it insured under your name. But in most situations, the ideal timeline, kind of 4 or 5 years, insurance history, buying their own vehicle for the first time. So you'd be looking around 21, 22, in and around there,
Okay.
their own policy. I mean, you can be 17 and to have your own insurance policy. It just has to do with when you have the ownership for that vehicle. But
Yeah, I'm
cheapest,
pretty sure that's what happened with me. I think I did have my own car at 16. I can't remember if it was in my name or if it was in my dad's name.
yeah.
Um but yeah, I guess it's I guess different situations. I guess it would just be
And
specific to
each
that situation.
each situation brings up its own issues, and it that's why it's good to have someone to sit down and go through the different things. But if you're talking like lowest price alternative, probably maxed out, probably 4 or 5 years experience, 4 or 5 years, then have their car and transfer off. That
Right.
that would be kind of ideal
Yeah, like if we
from
had
a
it as
standpoint.
a family car, like the third car in our family was still a family car, and 4 or 5 years in, Jaden wants to call the car his own and he pays us to buy the car or whatever, and then so then he can get the ownership put in his name and his own
It,
policy on that car.
and it would be affordable enough for him to go and say like, okay, not a problem.
Right. Okay.
That's, I mean, it can be earlier, it can be later. It's all dependent.
Right. Right. Perfect.
So
Anything
there you
else?
go.
I know that's kind of a heavy loaded episode here, but I think it's very valuable because I think there'll be a lot of parents that have these questions and they'll feel better after they hear about it.
Absolutely. And if there are any questions, like I know that you respond to them as well. They can
Yep.
send them to me, they can send them to you. We
Yep.
will follow up with them. Um, in terms of what you can do, it's like I said, just find someone, no matter who you're insured with, no matter where you go, find someone you're comfortable with. Find someone who you can actually just have a conversation, who wants to get to know information about you and what you need,
Right.
because each situation is oddly specific. And then just sit down, have a quick conversation, go over it.
Yeah.
My other thing is when you have a teen, do some of the pre-planning. Have a list of what some of the vehicles that they are thinking of
Hmm.
when the kid, when your teen is coming up to it and mentions that they want their own car. Have them sit down, have them involve them in that process and go through it with them. And they'll come out the other end 1,000 times smarter, 1,000 times savvier, and it
Hmm.
will serve them well in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we want to make sure our kids are set up for the future in good
I,
standings and understanding and educated and yeah,
absolutely.
very
I
good.
know my two girls are the same. So
Yeah.
I want them to understand everything. So that's how
Yeah,
I'll be going with
absolutely.
it.
And even like the repercussions and like what's going to happen if you're irresponsible and all those things. Like there's big ramifications that come if they're, doing silly things or driving under the influence or heaven forbid, hopefully, but
Yeah. No, and it's teaching them that there is ramifications for each of these things is an important part of it as well.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Well, if you guys ever have questions, please reach out. Ryan's number is there on the screen. You can reach him at 962-6444, extension 5017, for those of you that might be listening to this on the podcast. And you guys can reach me anytime. You know where to find me. I did change my Instagram and Facebook handles to World-Class Realtor. I used to be the most referred realtor. I changed it just to make things more simple. But other than that, we'll what's our next topic, Ryan?
I do not know. I was not ready for that.
No worries. We'll catch you on the next one. The next one's going to be just as good. We'll talk to you later.
Have a great week.
Thanks.
Bye.